So just to reiterate what we have discussed so far, the electoral party system started with basically Federalists against anti-Federalists. The Federalists kind of went away. The anti-Federalists were turned into the Democratic Republican Party, and the factions were government power, less government power, with the Federalists believing in more central government power and the anti-Federalists believing in less. And then there was a brief period when there were these Democratic Republicans. Eventually, they dropped the Republicans after a big to-do in the party, and called the party named Democrats. As time progressed, the Democrats became or promoted more grassroots operations, and we in the 1850s started to see a big issue arising over slavery, and eventually Democrats became the party that was pro-slavery. Whigs became the party of no expansion of slave states, and they had a big rift in the party because there were some that wanted the party to go further, and they really wanted to advocate for abolition of slavery. They became the Republicans, and the Whig Party did not have enough people to sustain itself. So you really had to decide if you were going to be nothing or a Democrat, or if you were going to be Republican. Since then, though there have been some serious realignments, the people that were Democrats in the 1940s are not the same people that are Democrats today. Although many would argue that that New Deal coalition has held, with African Americans part of Catholics. They have kind of split. They're kind of 50-50, where they used to be heavily Democrat. People of Jewish faith, I don't think that we really talked about that, were part of the New Deal coalition and are in large proportions Democrats still today. African Americans about 90%, Jewish about 85% or so, Hispanics about 65% are Democrats still today. Women are, I want to say 52%, but we're going to have to look up that number. But women skew Democrat, although it depends on where you live and it depends on what your ethnicity is. And with Hispanics, that's true as well. What is your country of origin, and and where do you live? Because Hispanics in Florida, especially Southern Florida, have long voted for Republican candidates, and there are several. I can think of two off the top of my head: Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, that are from Florida, or from the Florida area, that are of Cuban descent and are Republican. Now, Ted Cruz is the Texas senator right now. And so you have some serious numbers to look at. We saw we saw a defection from the Republican Party of some of the top leaders, the top strategists, the ex-military, people that had worked in the administration, were moving toward the Democratic candidate, if not the Democratic Party. You saw some really interesting ads from a group called the Lincoln Project, and they ran anti-Trump ads and encouraged people to vote for Joe Biden. And they were Republican. They were the people that were rolling up their sleeves and were helping John McCain and George W. Bush. Um, and so it is going to be very interesting to see where we're going when the dust settles and when we look back at this election and look at that new map. You're not going to see a sea of red or a sea of blue like we did in 1932. You're going to see some, but you will see some patterns. The South was heavily Republican, and the Midwest was heavily Republican. But California, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, and we're still waiting to hear about Arizona, maybe Georgia might be blue. That just boggles my mind. And once we are sure, it looks like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, Maine, all in the Northeast, are going to be blue. So it's going to be a different kind of map, and I don't know if that is a clear indication, because the moderates of both parties are going to have to figure out where to go, and they are meeting resistance from the far left, really liberal Democrats, and they're meeting resistance from the far right, really conservative Republicans. And so it's going to be interesting because I think that's where we're headed, to a party that is more moderate. That's going to be some Democrats and some Republicans, but we will watch. We will watch. Let's talk a little bit about elections. So basically, the way the Constitution is written, it does not give the power to run elections or to make decisions about how elections will be run to the federal government. So because of the 10th Amendment, that means that states have the right to make these decisions. In most races in for the United States House and United States Senate, people are elected from single member districts. They break the state down into several districts depending on how many electors you have. Right now, Texas, that means 36 districts, and we have 2 senators, so we have 38 electors. And most of our elections are run in plurality, meaning all you got to do is get one more vote than the other person. Now, in Georgia, they require, I'm not sure if this is true for the House, but definitely for the Senate, they require you to win a majority. So not just have the most votes, but you have to win 50% plus 1. And if neither candidate gets 50% plus 1, then you have to have a runoff election. They're going to have 2 runoff elections for 2 different seats in the Senate in January because of that rule. So majority is 50% plus 1 person. Plurality is just the most votes, whatever the percentage is. The way that our system is set up, though, it really discourages minor party participation. There are some states, Nebraska is one, and I want to say that the other one is Maine, that have proportional representation. So they don't do a winner takes all. If you got the plurality of the vote, then you get all the electors. They split theirs up. Um, and are a lot of arguments that we should not be doing winner takes all, that everybody should be doing proportional representation, because it gives people more of a voice and it encourages minor party participation. But the way our system is set up, the American parties are just trying to gain control and get their candidates elected. That means that they usually are trying to find somebody that is not going to offend too many people, but that will keep the people that are faithful to the party happy enough to continue to vote for the candidate. So the median voter theorem says that you maximize votes by appealing to the voters whose preferences are between the two parties. We have talked a lot about coalitions. Coalitions are groups and interests that support a party. One would argue that that is African Americans, that is some Hispanics, especially Hispanics that are concerned about immigration reform, who are concerned about their children that might be dreamers, that are recent immigrants or whose family members are immigrants. That includes women who feel as if women have not been given a fair shake. There is definitely what we call a gender gap. Now, the book says, and of course you have to remember when this was written, that the gender gap exists only between white men and white women. But we saw a bit of a gender gap develop between African American men and African American women in this last election, where more African American men voted for the Republican candidate. And the same thing was true for the Hispanic vote. More Hispanic men voted for the Republican candidate than had previously. So I don't know that it is fair to say in 2020 that the gender gap exists only between white men and white women. So these are numbers from 2016, I guess. So this is looking at the percentage of different demographic groups that voted in 2016. Yeah, in 2016. So breaking it down by race. And this is percentage that voted Democrat. 42% of whites voted Democrat for the Democratic candidate, which at the time was Hillary Clinton. 62% of Hispanics, 90% of African Americans or blacks, 56% of Asian. So the only group that did not have a significant percentage of their demographic group actually voting Democrat was whites. Let's look at the breakdown by age. 18 to 29%, 56% voted for the Democratic candidate, while 30 to 59, 49%, and over 60, only 47%. I believe that I'm hearing enough reporting to believe that there was a big shift in the 60 and older crowd voting for the Democratic candidate in the 2020 election. So here's a bit of what I was talking about with religion, and my numbers were a bit off. I was trying to say it off the top of my head. 34% of white Protestants, only 34% of white Protestants voted for the Democratic candidate. 45% of white Catholics voted for the Democratic candidate, and 76%, and I was saying that it was 85, 76% of those of Jewish faith voted for the Democratic candidate. And then if we're looking at financially, the top third, 40% voted for the Democratic candidate, the middle third, 47%, and the bottom third, economically, 63%. I am going to be chomping at the bit to see these numbers for 2020. I think that the African American number is going to go down slightly. I think the Hispanic number is going to be about the same when it comes out in the wash. Same for Asian Americans, although I bet it's going to be a little bit higher for Democrats. Y'all look and see if you can find some of these numbers. I think 56% for 18 to 29-year-olds is probably going to hold. Might be a slightly higher because a lot more young people voted in this election than we normally see. So it's going to be really interesting to look at these numbers in a few months. Some of the third parties that emerged over the years, and a lot of times third parties will come up because they have one issue that they are really working on. And some examples are the Free Soil Party or the Greenback Party. Then there are some that are factional. They have to do with a person. Like the Bull Moose Party was basically started by Theodore Roosevelt when he did not feel like the Republican Party or the Democratic Party was treating him right. Then in 1948, there was the States' Rights Party. 1968, the American Independent Party. And then, of course, we talked about the Dixiecrats. There are sometimes parties that arise because they believe in a certain ideology, like the Populists in the late 1800s, or the Libertarian Party that believes that government spends too much time in our business. And then there's sometimes a reform parties, the Progressive Party in the 1900s, the Reform Party in the late 1900s. So when a candidate is running for office, we are finding that unlike campaigns that used to be run and directed by the party and party leadership, campaigns are largely controlled by their candidates today. And we have definitely seen that in the last few elections. Maybe George W. Bush is an exception because he had a lot of people around him and they were making the decisions and they were pulling the strings and they were telling him where to go and how to hit his marks. But definitely Barack Obama had a very centered, this is what we're going to do, I have good instincts campaign. Donald Trump certainly did. Joe Biden is kind of old school, so I think the Democratic Party did some things, but really it was Joe Biden, his sister, and then the people that they hired that called the shots and made the decisions. So the candidates build a personal organization. They use that organization for campaigning. And once the campaign is over, that group is disbanded. It costs millions and millions of dollars to run for office. what we have that in the United States is something called primary elections. In the primary election, each of the major parties, Democrats and Republicans, decide who the candidate is going to be for each office in their state. So some states have primaries. Texas is among those. In March, we go and they ask you if you want a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot, and you tell them right then, and you vote in their election right then in the primary. And then we decide who the Republican candidates are going to be and who the Democratic candidates are going to be from the results from the primary. Some states have caucuses, and that means that they literally go into a room with several other people. I don't know how we're going to do this next time. Hopefully, we'll have everything settled down by the time that another caucus rolls around. People literally go and sit in sections and say, I'm voting for this candidate and I'm voting for this candidate. And then they hold an initial vote, and if people don't get a certain percentage of the vote, then their particular, I watched this with bated breath this year, their candidate is no longer in the running. So then they have to go figure out which other candidate they like, their second choice, and then they go, and once they all get in a section, somebody's in the Biden section, somebody's in the Klobuchar section, somebody's in the Sanders section, then they count them up, and they, from what I can tell, it's on pieces of paper. I think Iowa, who has the first caucus of the year, tried something electronic, and it just did not work. It did not work. So they may need to go back to the paper system. I am going to show you. This tickled me so much. This was 2012 during the Republican caucus. There were a couple of ladies that got very famous, Edith and Carolyn. So I'm going to just play you a little bit of the video when they were working on the Republican primary, the Republican caucus in Iowa.
We've actually called them from Clinton County, from the Republican Party in Clinton County. Edith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, now Carolyn is with you too?
Yes, I received a call at about 12:20 from the State Central Committee asking if I knew how to get a hold of someone from 2-2. At that time, they gave me a name, and I tried calling because it's late here. They were in bed, and the chair was also in bed. And
so what you're saying is
the information, so I came to Edith's home.
Clinton County. Edith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, now Carolyn is with you too?
Yes, I received a call at about 12:20 from the State Central Committee asking if I knew how to get a hold of someone from 2-2. At that time, they gave me a name, and I tried calling because it's late here. They were in bed, and the chair was also in bed. And
so what you're saying is
the information, so I came to Edith's home and pounded on the door and woke her up and got her up.
Ward 2, Precinct 2. Who won?
Mitt Romney won with 51 votes. Rick Santorum and Ron Paul tied with 33 votes each.
So that's 51 to 33. If this is the missing precinct, Wolf,
yep.
Added up there, Mitt Romney wins by 20-something votes.
What's the total for Clinton County? Romney, Santorum, Paul.
Oh. Are they correct? I haven't done. I added them up. I added them up a couple times. Oh man. I showed Romney coming up with a total of 437 votes from Clinton County. Santorum had 354. Perry had 73. Paul had 292. Huntsman 12, Gingrich 151, Michelle Bachmann 62, and there were 5 votes for Herman Cain.
The numbers we're receiving from the state do not match the numbers we just received from the county chairwoman right here in Clinton County. If these are the final numbers...
The numbers don't match.
Well, I'll explain it. I'll explain it to you. John, you go ahead and explain it.
The numbers, Madam Chairwoman, I'm not questioning your numbers. I'm saying the numbers you're giving us now do not match the numbers that the State Central Committee has reported so far from your county, and they say one precinct is missing. So if your numbers are that missing precinct, and these are the final numbers from Clinton County, excuse my scribble, but 437, not 386, 354, not 321, we can stop right there. Well, that would make
Romney the winner.
Romney the winner.
So they take their caucus and they're adding and they're turning in of numbers very seriously in Iowa. And everybody pays attention to Iowa because they are always first, and so you got to make it through Iowa usually to be the candidate. So if we're looking at what they spend money on, candidates spend a lot of money on media, and 14% of it is fundraising, strategy and research. They hire people to do research and to do polling. The people that work for the campaign have to be paid, and then but the largest portion is media. Now, what that media is has changed quite a bit, and that has been since 2008. The Obama campaign really figured out that they could utilize social media, and in 2016 the Trump campaign was unmatched in the algorithms that they were able to put together and figure out who they should be sending advertisements to and who they should be giving information to and raising money from. There is an adage that a guy named George Carville, who helped to run Bill Clinton's campaign, he said it's the economy, stupid. And so there is this question of, can a person get elected, or more importantly, get reelected, if the economy is not doing well? And of course, 2020, all bets are off. None of the previous trends are working, but just showing how well the incumbent, the person that had the job before, does when the GDP is on the rise. Even Bill Clinton in the 90s, who not many people were very happy with, rode a good economy into a re-election. So the campaigns again are very candidate centered, and so it depends on how people feel about the candidate, how the candidate makes people feel, and it does though mean that there are not as many regulated entities. Like the parties are heavily regulated, how much money they can accept, how they have to report who sent money in, how they make contact with the people that they are trying to encourage to go vote, and you lose some of that accountability when everything is run by the individual. So that is the end of the political parties. This is the second of 2 lectures.